And let's read the passage real quick. The passage that this all comes from is Matthew 16 through 19. I will read it and then I will pass it to my Father. Simon Peter replied, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Yeshua answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my ecclesia, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." And now I will scoop it over to my Father.
Well, the first thing to note, and I think this is pretty well known by people who have studied this particular passage, when he says in verse 18, this is Matthew 16:18, he says, "I also say to you that you are Peter." Now, that's the typical word name, but it's, and again, we're going to get into a little grammar here. It's Petros, which is masculine singular, meaning rock.
Right.
Okay? And he says, "You are Petros, and upon this..." Now, why doesn't he say Petros? He doesn't. In the Greek, if we believe the scriptures are inspired, and we do, he changed it to Petra. What is Petra? Petra means, according to the primary lexicon of the Greek apostolic scriptures, it means a bedrock or massive rock formations. Okay? And in fact, if we look to see where it's used, if you look at things like Revelation 6:15, "Then the kings of the earth and the great men and the commanders and the rich and the strong and every slave and free man hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains." And then in the next verse, and they said to the mountains and to the rocks, "Fall on us and hide us from the presence of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb." So basically, it's not just a little, Petros, even in typical Greek literature of the earliest that we have, Petros would be a field stone. In other words, it's something that it was small enough you could pick up with your hand, or that you could move with your foot, or something to that effect. So are we to take this as a valuable understanding of the text? Yes, I believe we are. We're to say, he says, "Peter, you're easily moved." How do we see that? Well, there's this little girl that asks him, don't you know this Yeshua guy? And he says, no, never heard of him. Easily moved. Now, I grant Peter repented and he was forgiven. But then he says, "Upon this rock." What rock is he talking about? Well, good question. It'd be nice to know exactly where he was standing when he said this. Some think that he was in a place where you could see the outcroppings of the mountain and so forth. But at any rate, I think he's talking about something relating to, therefore, upon this rock, meaning himself, or it could be that upon this rock, meaning all of the apostles. In other words, what they would write about him. "I will build my ecclesia." So when he says, "I will build my ecclesia," what is that? That is the fulfillment of the promise made to Abraham, that in your seed all the nations of the earth will be blessed, and used, 5 times in the book of Genesis, and sometimes it says nations, and sometimes it says families. Why does it change from nations to families? Because nations and what a family has is a lineage. Okay? What is nation? A nation is a group of people that have various lineages that are put together as a nation. Okay? So basically, when he says, "I will build my ecclesia and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it and overpower it," he's saying it's his work. Yeshua said his death, his resurrection, his ascension, and his intercession on behalf of those who are his would be that rock upon which the ecclesia that he was to build. And what was that ecclesia? Something brand new? No, it was, as Paul teaches us, it was the remnant of Israel into which is engrafted those from the nations who are chosen by God to be part of his family. And so you have the nations and the families put together, and this rock is the foundation. And it's used that way. It's used, the Petra in the feminine form there is used that way, of a whole foundation upon which a building is built. It's not just a little rock. So it's something that can't be moved. He said, "You're Peter, you're easily moved, but upon this foundation, all that God would accomplish through his son Yeshua, our Savior, and those that he would choose as apostles and teach them his message, and they would write it according to the superintending of the Spirit of God, and it would become the apostolic scriptures, which would give all of the aspects of this increased building of his ecclesia in fulfillment of the promise made to Abraham.
Yeah, John Owen, in the very first words and chapter of his books, he talks about this, and I have been fully convinced by Owen's argument. He says that the first phrase that Peter makes, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God," is the clause that Yeshua now takes and says, "Upon this rock I will build my ecclesia," not upon Peter, because right. and Owen argues, we see just a couple verses later, Yeshua says to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are a hindrance." And so therefore the church cannot be built upon Peter. It has to be built upon this phrase, "You are the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And I think that Owen makes a great argument for this. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking the subscribe button, and check out more videos from Messiah Matters.